I solemnly pledge myself before God and in the presence of this assembly to pass my life in purity and to practice my profession faithfully, to hold in confidence all matters revealed to me in the practice of my calling, to abstain from knowingly administering any harmful medicine, to do all in my power to maintain the standard of the nursing profession, to endeavor with loyalty to aid the physician in his work, to devote myself to the welfare of those patients committed to my care. I've recited that pledge 1,000 times, Senator. I know it by heart. My father was a tall man. When I was a little girl, I would run Sunday mornings to watch him raise his arms high up above his head so that he could reach a tin can he had hidden behind an oak crossbeam above the entranceway to the kitchen. Money in the bank, he'd smile, rattling the tin can that held that week's addition to the household change. Then he'd lift me up in his arms so I could touch it too. On a Sunday morning, the week of my 5th birthday, he held me up, and as my hands touched the cool tin can, I felt a tiny tremor in his arm. The next day, Monday, my father took to bed with a quiet cough. His temperature increased on Tuesday and Wednesday. Oh, shaking and chills came Thursday. And by Friday daybreak, my father, a man who could stand in his Sunday shoes and touch higher than the oak crossbeam at the entranceway to our kitchen, had passed on. I remember crying when I was told that my father would not be playing with me again, that he was gone forever. But what about after I wake up, after this night? I didn't understand that word, forever. I just knew there was something keeping me from my father, something I hated. Pneumonia, they called it. I hated that pneumonia. And I held that hate in the back of my mind, waiting for the day when something would come along to destroy that pneumonia as easily as my father had swung me up in his arms the Sunday of my 5th birthday. "23 years later, in 1932, I was still waiting. 626 were positive for syphilis, including Miss Evers' boys. Yes, there were other places, colored and white, with just as much syphilis, but the government sender chose Macon County. And when the government made that choice, well, I just figured our turn for good times had finally come. The following week, we tested blood and we began treatment for those men. A 2-year course of mercury salve body rubs and arsenic injections. Oh, that was the best treatment available at that time. 55% effective. It could cure you if it didn't kill you first. Those first 6 months, those men were winning every which way until the government pulled the string and the bottom fell out. You've got to go back, Senator. You've got to appreciate Macon County, Alabama in 1932 to understand what caring meant at those times. You've got to think like we thought then. You're talking about civil rights. I'm talking about people just trying to stay alive and some other people trying their best to help them. If you want to walk where I walk, you got to be walking that messy middle ground. When you're up close for 14 years, you don't notice the changes unless they catch you by surprise. But even then, after a while, those surprises get familiar, and it almost seems like nothing has changed. Those men looked healthy, no pain or nothing like that, and they felt good. You wouldn't believe anything was wrong with them. That's the kind of disease it was. See? Hidden. Some people in this room might have syphilis at this very moment, and you wouldn't know it. No offense meant, Senator. I'm not saying there weren't consequences. I'm just saying it wasn't that simple. The disease was not predictable, and there was no money. And the treatment was dangerous. Convulsions, teeth would fall out. It was ridiculous. I came to believe that if a person looked good, you best just leave them be. But 1946 changed all of that. Something new arrived, something that changed everything. The silver bullet, they called it. Penicillin. Meningitis, cured. Pneumonia, cured, finally. And now, syphilis, cured. A national treatment program. And my patients were going to be first in line. You can't ever do a kindness too soon, Willie. That afternoon, when Mr. Bryan and Mr. Washington came round, I gave a hat to each. They thanked me and promised to wear them, and they did. But the big excitement that day was the United States government certificate of appreciation given to each man for participating in the study for 14 years. It had their name printed on it in indelible ink. Mr. Washington especially liked that. And the government, Senator, gave each man $14, $1 a year. Call him back here. Say something. Don't let him go. Dr. Brodus, I know those numbers. They're my friends and neighbors. I sit beside those numbers at church, and I got news for you. You're one of those numbers, Dr. Brodus, and so am I. And so was your mama and your daddy. And if you've come so far up that you've forgotten your mama picking cotton, then let me remind you now. Bang! Damn you! That's all of what I might have said right then. But all I said was, I'm feeling deeply uneasy. I'm having more and more doubts. And I said all that to myself. Mr. Benjamin Washington died at 74 years of age. A long life, but not a good one. I got Mr. Washington that coffin. He looked serene and peaceful. Mr. Hodman Bryan died of convulsions caused by the ingestion of 32 ounces of turpentine. A footnote in the autopsy report mentioned elements curiously consistent with those found in the Herxheimer reaction to penicillin. I never found out for sure. Who could I ask, Senator? I had killed that man. After that, Senator, I just fell in love. Those that got out were safe. Mr. Willie Johnson left Macon County for Tipton County, Tennessee in 1956. He got that hip shot of penicillin. It tipped it. And that's why he can walk with a cane instead of crutches. Mr. Caleb Humphreys got out too. He became a preaching man and with a traveling circuit. I lost track of them after they left Macon. We used to tell these men that the disease had 3 parts. You get it, you forget it, and then you regret it 20 or 30 years later when it comes back to haunt you. That's how it's been with me too. I tried to stop thinking about it after 1946. The men were set apart from the thousands that were treated with penicillin, and the study continued. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male had acquired a life of its own. It had become familiar. Each spring, I prepared a report on the number of patients remaining. 412 in 1946. 360 10 years later. 127 this year. 1972. In the testimony today, there was a man gracious enough to wonder what effect the scandal, as he put it, might have on the public health nurse who had worked with the participants and who lived in Tuskegee. She has been known throughout the program as a selfless woman, he said, who devoted her entire career to this project. And then he was kind enough to hope that it would not be necessary for her to share any of the blame. Well, now, Senator, there's big blame and there's little blame. The big blame, well, that seems to be going to the government and those doctors. Some people in Macon, I even saying the government gave those men the disease in the first place. I can't let myself be thinking about that. I got enough thinking to do just handling the little blames. Those are the blames that got nothing to do with talk about right and wrong and black and white and guinea pigs and money. Those little blames are when you go back to where you lived, your entire life and catch your friends looking at you for no seeming reason. And people walk by you and don't say good morning. And they don't use your name when they're giving you change, as if using it would dirty their mouths up some. Newspapers don't publish stories about these little flames, but they mount up and they're strong and they push you to live a new way of life. I loved those men. Those men were susceptible to kindness.